Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating historical mystery, one that's going to dive deep into ancient texts, timelines, and the very foundations of Christian tradition. We'll be looking closely at a really thought-provoking analysis by Mark Mountjoy, which critically examines the timeline of the apocalypse.
Our source material for this investigation is Mountjoy's text, Clarifying the Apocalyptic Claims of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Basically, this text offers a detailed, step-by-step challenge to the Eastern Orthodox Church's understanding of exactly when Christ's return and the prophesied end times were supposed to happen. It's an analysis that asks us to set aside our modern assumptions for a bit and look strictly at historical and linguistic evidence.
Which leads us to a highly provocative question. Ready? What if the apocalypse already happened? Keep that in the back of your mind as we go, because this is the central investigative premise of our explainer today. Mountjoy is essentially proposing that the events we typically place way off in the distant future actually belong to the documented past.
Section 1. The ultimate theological contradiction.
Okay, so let's start with the rules. Consider the concept of the Vincentian Canon. Now, this isn't just some minor guideline. Mountjoy points out that this is the absolute supreme standard for orthodox theological authority. To be considered authentic Christian teaching, a belief must have been held everywhere, always, and by all. It is quite literally the ultimate litmus test for doctrinal truth in this tradition.
But here's where we hit a massive, glaring paradox. The original apostolic expectation, meaning the belief held by the very first century Christians, was that the end was imminent. They fully believed it was going to happen right then in their lifetimes. However, the current tradition teaches that these events are pending, waiting for some distant, unfulfilled future. So Mountjoy points out that if the Church strictly follows the Vincentian Canon, their current future-focused stance actually contradicts what the original apostles universally believed.
Section 2. Decoding the Greek text.
Let's play cryptographer for a minute and look at the actual Koine Greek used in the apostolic writings. Look at these specific terms. ἐγγύς, meaning near. Entache, meaning shortly. Μέλλω, meaning about to be. Tάχει, meaning quickly. The crucial point Mountjoy is making here is that the source material overwhelmingly relies on precise linguistic tools that point to an event that is very, very close. They aren't using vague, timeless metaphors, They are using language that screams immediate urgency. And perhaps the most significant phrase in the Olivet Discourse is this generation. Mountjoy argues that in the context of Koine Greek, this phrase firmly anchors the prophecies to the literal people standing right there listening to Jesus. It absolutely does not mean a vague, ambiguous future generation thousands of years later. It meant that specific generation, full stop.
Section 3. History's Forgotten Eyewitnesses.
So, did it happen? Well, mapping out the late Second Jewish Commonwealth, we see signs beginning in the mid-3820s on the Hebrew calendar. That leads directly into the devastating Jewish-Roman War, which culminates in the absolute destruction of the Temple in 70 CE. Mountjoy points out that the catastrophic dismantling of the Jewish order perfectly, and I mean remarkably, aligns with the apostolic timeline of anticipated judgment.
And get this, we don't even have to just take the apostles' word for it. We have Flavius Josephus. He was a first-century historian, a military commander, and a Roman-aligned figure with absolutely zero theological interest in confirming Christian prophecy. Yet his incredibly detailed eyewitness accounts of the siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple provide the most concrete independent proof that these apocalyptic events unfolded exactly as they were described in the New Testament. Talk about an unintentional witness.
Section 4. Cracking the Revelation Code.
Now, to understand the book of Revelation, Mountjoy explains we need to understand remez. This is an ancient rabbinic ciphering technique. The author of Revelation wasn't just throwing out wild psychedelic metaphors about the distant future. They were actually using a highly sophisticated code, embedding contemporary first-century identifications right inside scriptural allusions. Why? Well, this allowed them to speak specifically about current oppressors, while totally protecting the early Christian community from Roman retaliation. It's brilliant, really.
Let's decode this in practice, according to the source. The infamous 666, it isn't some futuristic barcode. It's the exact amount of gold talents Solomon collected at the height of his apostasy. It's a clear signature of covenantal betrayal. The great city is explicitly identified in the text as where the Lord was crucified, which is Jerusalem. And Gog and Magog, described as numerous as the sand of the sea, points right back to Old Testament promises regarding the rebellious covenant people. So Revelation was undeniably pointing backward to first-century figures and locations, hiding them in plain sight.
Section 5. The Augustan Shift.
Okay, plot twist time. To understand how this original meaning got lost, we have to jump forward to the year 410 CE. The unthinkable happens. Rome falls. This event entirely shatters the institutional security of the Church. The brilliant theologian Augustine of Hippo is writing his masterpiece, The City of God, in response to this absolute existential crisis. But remember, he was writing centuries removed from the original Jewish context of the first century. According to Mountjoy, Augustine desperately needed an eschatology that couldn't be destroyed by the fall of an empire. So he made what the source calls the single most consequential interpretive move in Christian history. First, he relocated the millennium of Revelation 20 backward to Pentecost, making it an ongoing, present spiritual reality rather than a specific future event. But by doing this, he accidentally subsumed the preceding 19 chapters of Revelation. They totally lost their specific historical anchor and became just this ambient spiritual backdrop for the ongoing church age.
Mountjoy describes Augustine's action with a really devastating metaphor. He calls it the single interpretive stone that shattered the apocalypse's mirror. Now, Augustine doesn't act out of malice, right? He was literally saving the church's theology during an unprecedented crisis. But by shifting that timeline, he accidentally made the original first-century literal meaning totally invisible to all future generations.
Section 6. Confronting the Evidence.
Now, you might be wondering, what about all the people who wrongly predicted the end of the world? Mountjoy calls this the failure catalog argument, the idea that every person who has tried to predict the end has failed, so we just shouldn't try. But there's a really crucial distinction here. Every failed prediction, from William Miller to modern date setters, has been a futurist prediction. They are constantly looking forward to events still to come. Mountjoy's framework of fulfilled eschatology is entirely different. It doesn't predict the future at all. It looks backward to identify past events that are already thoroughly documented in history. The source even briefly rehabilitates a highly controversial second-century figure named Montanus. Traditionally, he's just dismissed as a failed prophet, but Mountjoy notes that Montanus actually correctly realized the judgment sequence of Revelation was already in the past. His error wasn't his timeline, it was his map. He mistakenly expected the massive cosmic New Jerusalem to literally drop out of the sky onto a small peninsula in Asia Minor. Close, but no cigar.
Ultimately, Mountjoy emphasizes that returning to this early framework, reading the text within its proper Semitic and first-century background, doesn't destroy the faith. In fact, he argues that it is the only way to truly honor the original apostolic text. It completely removes the need to constantly adjust timelines and allows the text to just stand firm in history.
Just consider the original Greek phrase from Revelation 1:3, ho kairos gar ἐγγύς, for the time is near. That perfectly encapsulates the unmistakable, literal urgency of the original authors. They weren't speaking in riddles for people living 2,000 years later. They were warning their immediate first-century communities.
So, what does this all mean for us today? We've looked at the Greek vocabulary, the historical eyewitnesses, the theological shifts. The massive question we're left with now is, will the tradition allow these ancient words to mean what they literally say? It's an absolutely fascinating intersection of history, language, and tradition, and I really hope this explainer has given you some incredible new perspectives to chew on. Thanks so much for learning with us today.